In this episode, we're going to be covering setting up some very basic UI so we can keep track of things like health and score without us having to do that print string at the top left. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move these to one side just to make it a bit neater. I'm going to go into the third person blueprint. I'm going to take off this print string. So we're going to set up the UI where we don't need to have that anymore. We want to make a new folder in the content base folder called UI, and that'll allow us to have things neatly in here. That'll cover everything UI, so if you're adding main menus and things like that, you can have that there. What I'm going to then do is right click the empty space, mouse over user interface, and do the widget blueprint. So widget is just what they're called for UI in Unreal Engine, and then we're just going to click this top button here. So we're going to make a basic one, and I like to call this UI underscore HUD. So this is the heads up display. This is what's going to show when the player is playing the game. What we then need to do is we need to add a few things. So there's something I like to add in here that'll allow it to sort of scale no matter what the screen size is. Things will always fit in 16:9 resolution ratio resolution, which is the normal resolution. So I can't remember exactly the order, but we're going to find out. So if we put a size box in here and then a scale box, this should then work. I think it's the other way. So we're going to do a scale box and then a size box. And then in here, we want to override the width and the height. So the width is going to be 1920 by 1080. I don't think it matters too much on the actual numbers as long as it's one of the traditional 16:9 resolutions. And then as we scale that down, you can see it's still going to fit inside of this 16:9 resolution. So from this then, we want to add a canvas panel. A canvas panel is what you need to add in for things to be shown on the screen. So once the canvas panel's in, we then want to add, for instance, a text box. We could add a text box in here, and that's going to be the score. So I'm going to change the anchor. So if you click on the text box, and then you can see on the top right, the first option is anchors, and I'm going to set it into the top right. This just allows us to have a bit more control over where the thing's actually placed and when stuff scales, although the size box covers a lot of that issue. It just allows you to have a little bit more control over what's going on. So currently when I set this to 0 and 0, it's pointing the other way. So I want to change this X value for alignment from 0 to 1. What alignment does is it works from 0 to 1. So 0.5 would be perfectly in the middle. So if you are wanting something perfectly in the middle, set the alignments to 0.5 and 0.5, and then set the position to 0 and 0, and it'll be perfectly in the middle then. But for this case, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to do offsets of 20 and 20 minus 20. And then I've got that set up there. What I'm then going to do is set that to 0. Yeah, so what I'm thinking of here is whether to do size to content. Now, the issue I have with size to content is if you've got, so I'm planning on doing score, colon, and then the number. What the issue with size to content would be was when the number starts getting bigger, the actual text will start to shift as well, so it'll look very weird, and especially if you've got pre-made sort of background assets, it won't look right. So I'm not going to do size to content, and I'm just going to make it a number big enough where if I add this and I add sort of a big number there, it's sort of going off a bit, so maybe I'll do 300, no, 250, that'll be an okay number for me. So if I put the score to 0, we're going to be setting this in code anyway, but if I set the base number, I know what I'm working with. And then want to promote this to a variable. This way we can change the text in code as we get a score. So I'm going to call this text underscore score, and then we've got that there. What we can then also do is add a progress bar, and then that's perfectly put in place, 20 and 20, and I want to do 300, and this is going to be the health bar. So typically, health bars to me would be red, or sometimes they are green, but I'm going to do a red one, so that's going to be in the top corner there, and then the score is going to be here. Yeah, so what we want to do is change this to bar underscore health. You can name these whatever you want, it's just something that would make sense to you when you are referencing them in code, so you can easily remember them. So I'm going to save all, you need to make sure to always be doing that. And then in the third person character, we want to start to display this HUD in the game. So what we want to do on begin play, after the adding mapping context, we then want to add create widget, and then from this we want to select the one that we made, so INM and UI underscore HUD. So I'm going to make that. What I then want to do is drag off this blue return value, and I want to promote to variable. So don't type anything, but you can, if you have accidentally typed something, you can type promote to variable and it'll show up as well. And then it'll make a new variable that we can rename. So I'm going to call this HUD ref, so short for HUD reference. And then from this, we want to add to viewport. If you don't do add to viewport, it won't display and you won't be able to see it in your game. But this allows us to then reference it further in code. So as long as this is set and the UI is still visible, then we can start to edit those values that we've made as variables here. So if I play the game, it should show up there. So you can see there, and if I full screen it, it'll sort of scale to what we need. Because this is a strange resolution, it's sort of scaled it to fit whatever screen it is. So we're not currently updating the text, so when I walk over these it doesn't update the score text, so that's what we're going to do now. So in the UI HUD, if we make custom events, we can then just trigger those events, so we don't have to have lots of code in the third person character blueprint. So what we can do, if you just right click an empty space in the UI HUD, in the graph, so you'll have initially had the designer. On the top right, click graph and you go to the event graph, and if we type custom, then there'll be a custom event. This is where we can trigger custom things. So add score. Oh, there we are. Add score, and then we can do custom update health bar. So I might rename this to update score in case you have something where you can purchase something and it won't be adding it, it'll just be updating the number. So what we want to do then is we want to get player character. So this will reference whatever the player character is. So by default, it's going to be choosing the third person character. So we want to cast to third person character. That'll communicate if the player character is the third person character, then we can reference this third person character. But what we want to do is we want to get the score value, and then we want to get the text score, and we want to set text. We want to make sure we're selecting the set text that has the in brackets text. So it should be, when you type set text, it should be the bottom one. By default, it'll select the set tooltip text. We don't want that one. We want the one that has the in brackets text. So then we've got that linked up there. So what we want to do here is we want to append, and we want to find the one that's string. So it should be the bottom one, and it'll have this little function f. This will allow us to put two things together. So we want to get the value of score, and we want to link that up to the end of the append. And then we want to do score, all capitals, with a space. Make sure the space is on there, otherwise the space won't be in there when you update the text. The reason why we need to do this, if we linked up the score to the text, then it would get rid of the score colon. So we want to make sure that we have this append where we can add the additional context to that. With the update health bar, If we quickly add some health into the character, I can show you how to set that one up properly. So if we add a new variable and we call this health, and it's already an integer, so that's fine. But if this maximum health is 100, then that's fine. If it's not 100, make sure you have another variable called max health, and there's a reason for that. So the max health again would be 100, and then in here we want to do this exact same thing, and then we want to drag off the third person character reference, and we want to get health, and then if your number isn't exactly 100, because what we're needing to do here, so I'll show you what it is. So the percent of the progress bar goes from 0 to 1. So what we need to then do is make sure that what we're having here is the value of 1. So what we need to do, so you could potentially do the health divided by 100 and you get that value there. But if you have a weird max health where it's maybe 150 or 200, dividing it by 100 wouldn't get that value that you need. So what we then need to do is get max health and then link that up there. So what it'll do is it'll get the current health divided by the maximum health. So I'll show you this as an example. So let's say that the health is 75. So if we do 75 divided by 75, that's 1. But if we've reduced the health, so we've got maybe 60 health now, if we do 60 divided by 75, then we've got 0.8. So that'll start to trickle down until you get obviously 0, which would then be 0. So no matter what the maximum health is, if you have this set up as the current health divided by the maximum health, then you'll have the percentage that you need to work with. What we then need to do is we need to change this to a float. So what we need to do is to float on here, and then what this then should is convert this end number to a float. So the reason for this is when integers can only be whole numbers, so it can only be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but what we need to do is get decimal numbers. So we need 0.6, 0. Whatever. That wouldn't come out, so it would only be full health or no health. So we need to convert these to a float by dragging off the integer and then typing to float, and then it'll convert it, and then we've got the float value here now. What we then do is get the health bar, set percent, and then put the percentage in from that health, and then we've got a working health bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in these into the third person character for them to trigger when certain events happen. So there are some tutorials that would say to bind it to a function. The issue with that is that it runs at a tick, so it could be inefficient to do that. What would be best to be doing is to link it up to certain actions that would update the score. So with that, it's probably going to be in the pickup blueprint, we want to update the score because that's where we add the score, so then we know that's the only case where the score would be increased. So when we cast to the third person character, we want to add to the score, and then we want to get HUD ref, and then we want to update the score, and then destroy actor. So that should then start to update the score. I'll show that now. So that's updating that UI there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the health bar update in here as well. So in the default event graph, actually let's add a new function, and we're going to do maybe take damage. So with the input, we're going to do amount. So there is a default function. It's called apply damage, I think. I like to make my own just so I have a lot more control over what's happening. But what the amount is going to do is it's going to take away from the current health, and then we're going to set the health to that new value. What we could then do is add all the stuff in, so we'd do the compare and things like that. But what I'm going to do just for the case of UI is make it so it's just this, and then let's say we're going to replace jump with the take damage. Not that one, started. And then if we take 10 damage, we should then start seeing the thing reducing. What we need to do first though is do the HUD reference in the take damage function, and we want to update health bar. We want to do this at the very end because we want all the damage values to be applied, and then the updated health bar is done. So every time we jump, oh, that's flicking between. So something's going weird. So the health is currently 100. And then the amount should only be 10. So that is 10. And then we're going to set that to the new value. What we're then going to do is have a look at this and see what's going on here. So here's a good way where we can show debugging. So if I drag off this and I do a print string, we can then see what this value is coming out here. Do that as a 2. So the reason why we do it as a 2 and not a 0, other than the previous episode that I made, is because this is only going to trigger once. So I want it to be on the screen for 2 seconds, otherwise it'd instantly vanish. So that's going to minus 90. And the reason for that is because I was very silly and I did the amount after the health. So so I took away the amount from, I took away health from the amount, so it became a minus number. So that was a silly mistake of mine, but we just need to spin those around. So it's this health minus the amount. So rather than it being minus 90, it should now then just be 90. There we are. And then it's slowly trickling down, and then when you reach 0, you would then do the damage. So with that, I can take off this print string because I've quickly debugged what the issue was, which was more often than not human error. So make sure you are double checking at all points of the code what's gone wrong, and then you should, with the print strings, you should get an idea of what's going on. So this was the tutorial for UI setup, very basic UI.